Welcome, everyone, to our Book Bungalow International Literature Virtual Book Club. We are so pleased today to have the author Ben Aitken with us for the discussion of his book, The Marmalade Diaries. I'm using the ARC, but you all have copies, yeah. He was born under Thatcher, grew to 6 feet, then stopped, and is an Aquarius. He followed Bill Bryson around the UK for Dear Bill Bryson, Footnotes from a Small Island, which was published in 2015. Then moved to Poland to understand why everyone was leaving. Doesn't that just sound like his humor right there? A chip shop in Poznan, I'm probably mispronouncing that. My Unlikely Year in Poland, which was published in 2019, is the fruit of that unusual migration. For the Grand Tour, Travels with My Elders, which was good preparation for what was to come with Winnie, published in 2020, the author went on 6 package coach holidays. Scarborough, how do you say? Llandudno?
Yeah, that'll do.
No, how do you say it?
Well, I would say Llandudno because the double L somehow becomes a cla, but
okay, that's good to know. Llandudno. Lake Como, and I spent, 6 months in Como. Beautiful, beautiful.
Yeah.
With people twice or thrice his age in order to see what they had to say for themselves and to narrow the generation gap a notch. The Marmalade Diaries is the story of an unlikely friendship during an unlikely time and stems from the author's decision to move in with an 85-year-old widow 10 days before a national lockdown. I'm going to turn the time over to Valerie now to begin the discussion of this book and ask questions.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Well, actually, I'd like to just start off by getting everybody's kind of general impression of how they like the book. So let's start off with Virginia.
Hello, everyone. It's good to see you again and to meet you also, Benjamin. I totally enjoyed this book. It was a smooth flow. I could pick it up and put it down depending on what was going on in my life. And there were parts of it where I so related because when I was 24, I was caretaking my 85-year-old grandmother, and just to hear her stories, but also to see her routines. And she loved gardening too. So there were so many different crossovers here for me and stirring up in my own life space. And now I'm not quite there. I still have about a decade to go, but nevertheless, it's kind of interesting then to have a young person's perspective now that I'm over on that other generation era, and to also then wonder about all the young people I spend time with, what their perceptions are of me now. And so it's just really triggered a lot of introspection like that. So thank you.
Okay. Carla, how about you?
Hi, everybody. Ben, this book was just an absolutely delicious read, and not just because it's called Marmalade. It was just one of those lovely, touching stories. And like Virginia, I have to say that it was so relatable, but to me in a different way. Yeah, I'm about a decade younger than Winnie, but what I truly appreciated were your insights about what was driving Winnie during that tenuous period in her life after the loss of her husband. I have to say that I saw myself in that when my husband passed away of 42 years. It was suddenly like I couldn't stop saying we do this, or we're going here, or we're going there. But I also really thought that you had an amazing ability a very touching ability to understand why she was acting the way she was, or some of the reactions that she would have, what the anger was really about, or the concern. What was coming out of her was concern for things as opposed to negativity. I mean, I look back at that and I remember my children saying, "Mother, just sit down," because I would always be standing up, bustling around. It was a way to regain normalcy somehow. And I still find myself, if we have guests, I want the chair closest to the kitchen in case I need to race out there and grab extra cream or something. So I really loved your insights with that period in her life, because there's so much that goes on inside of you when it's I versus we. So thank you for that, Ben. It was, I don't know how you had that insight, but it was really, really right on. I could relate to it. Plus the humor in it was absolutely, I don't laugh out loud at many books, but my husband said, "What are you reading?" It was just, I said, "You just won't believe this, Winnie," and I'm reading some things. He said, "That kind of sounds familiar." So, so there are elements clear. It's clearly still in me of Winnie. So thank you for making her relatable. Thank you, Ben.
Thanks, Kyle. Tanya, did you read the book?
I did. I read, yes, I did. I'm going to go back. I read quickly towards the end because I was still trying to finish up the current from our mystery thriller thing. But I have to say that this was such an enjoyable read. Particularly, you have to understand, Ben, that we do a lot of, in our international literature, they're very heavy books usually.
Yes.
They're very often tragic or something, depressing about them. So this was such a nice change up in comparison. And as I was saying before we began recording, it just made me think of a lot of the British expatriates we met in my years growing up overseas. Winnie was just and I hope, well, I'm sure Valerie has a bunch of questions ready, and that'll be the first one, but
yes,
I would love to have met her in person. Anyway.
Yeah. Okay. Shauna.
Okay, I thought this book was hilarious. In fact, I downloaded an audiobook so that I could listen to it while I was driving through Zion and Bryce yesterday and just laughing. And I already have a huge list of people I'm going to get it for Christmas or whatever. But I related to Winnie, and I'm only 62, but I am so much like her, unfortunately. So I want my children to read this book and say, I'm not the only one. That's weird. There are other of us out in the world, but like Tanya said before the meeting started, I was telling her I had my oldest daughter and her 4 children over on Sunday for dinner, and I have this new dining table that I bought a couple of years ago, and this is beautiful Brazilian cherry wood, and I have a high chair that I expect my grandkids to sit in, but the 1-year-old was on this wooden table, and my daughter had given her just a butter knife, and I'm like, no, get her off. I don't want her ruining my table. And I keep the blinds closed in that nook so that it doesn't fade. And Winnie did that, and I was just like, oh no, this is me already. It's horrifying, but anyway, I loved everything about it. So thank you.
All right, and Susan.
Yes, I would echo everyone's comments, especially about seeing ourselves in Winnie and seeing my mother in Winnie and my grandmother in Winnie, my grandmother who immigrated from Cornwall when she was a young woman, or a young girl, actually an adolescent, with her family, and my mother, who's first generation American, but still kind of echoed that English thinking, that, and yeah, so, and I loved Ben, I loved your perception after Winnie's fall and broken hip. I can't tell you how many times my mother fell in her last years and didn't often have broken bones, but a lot of lacerations. But your insight into Winnie and her GP coming in and going, oh, well, you know, she's not functional anymore. My mother did not have dementia. She was still demanding that we do everything she'd tell us up until pretty much when she couldn't speak anymore, a couple of days before she died. She was in charge of everything. And then people wonder why the 3 girls in the family are bossy. So, but yeah, I saw an awful lot of myself and my mother and the rest of the girls in our family in Winnie. And we tried to clean our junk out of mother's house, and we'd put it in the box for disposal, and she would take things out. So yes, definitely could identify with so many things. Thank goodness my mother had to move out of the farmhouse before she died, but she still held a lot of the junk. And I'm sitting in the Crook family library and archive because I'm the successor trustee and I inherited the junk we didn't get rid of. So yeah, I'm trying to get rid of that now too. So thank you, Ben, for making something so identifiable. And yeah. I can really sympathize with you being there with Winnie. My younger brother was my mother's caretaker for the last few years of her life and had to fly over from Denver to do it. But he was a pilot, so he could do that. But he committed that she would go out of the house feet first. She would not be going into a care center. So I have some questions that I sent to Valerie for you.
All right. Well, thank you, Susan. And I have to agree, this book is so funny, it's so relatable. You see yourself in it, you see your family members in it. It was a beautiful read. And like Tanya was saying, we do read some very serious stuff in this book club. So this was just like a breath of fresh air. I'd like to start off by talking about how you got into this situation in the first place, where you were living with an 85-year-old woman. I mean, you talk about how all of Winnie's friends, they were all kind of joking with her and saying, you know, like, how's this young man that you've got living with you? Was this something that was really unusual for your friends as well? Surprising? How did that all happen?
Yeah. Before I answer that, Valerie, just thank you, Virginia, Carla, Shauna, Susan, Tanya, for your feedback. That was so touching, actually. I was bracing myself for some figurative tomatoes being flung in my direction. And I think I said to both Valerie and Tanya, make sure everyone feels comfortable, being very critical and ultra honest, because I guess I'm inclined to think that the glass is half empty when it comes to people receiving the book. And so that was really, really nice. Thank you for your time and for reading the book and for sharing those thoughts. Regarding moving in with Winnie, living with an 85-year-old woman had been an ambition of mine since I was a young child. So no, that's not true. But it was very unconventional. I was just looking for a room in the city. One popped up at a super cheap price, and I thought, what is the catch? Mm-hmm. Turns out the catch was Winnie, and I wasn't petrified or horrified at the prospect, partly because of the Grand Tour, which was the book I wrote before, and that was traveling coach holidays around Europe with people a lot older than me, and that persuaded me that people with more chapters under their belt, with more time on the clock, tend to be more interesting, amusing, philosophical than my own cohort, my own generation. And that's not to disparage millennials or Gen Zers or whatever. I just wasn't put off by the fact that my housemate would be 85. So for me, that wasn't a deterrent. And so I wouldn't say I jumped at the chance of living with Winnie, because I'd met her before I moved in. That's she gave me pause for thought, but no, I was willing. I was definitely willing.
Okay, thank you. And I would like to open it up at this time and let other people kind of jump in with burning questions that they have.
You don't say, is Winnie still with us?
Yeah.
She is, up to a point. She's not been home since she fell over in the garden that summer, which was last summer 2021. I think it was July the 4th, actually, Independence Day. There was that. Yeah, that was a bleak irony. She's not been back home since. She went to the hospital, she went to the care home, and she's been in the care home since then. Okay. And she hasn't benefited from the experience, let's put it that way. She is, at this point, a real shadow of her former self, but that sounds too negative description. But she's not the Winnie that I knew, unfortunately. She keeps on falling over, partly owing to a lack of supervision, but I think that's par for the course in any sort of care facility. You can't have one member of staff per resident. That I don't think the economics work there. So people are always liable to fall. She's certainly doing her fair share of falling. And I think spending time with people who have more advanced dementia is only going to accelerate your own. Yeah. And so when I visit her now, I think there's some recognition of who I am, but thereafter it's just a series of non sequiturs about things in her life. It's like, and I don't think any description would be sort of appropriate, but it's a bit like there's a compilation album playing the tracks of her life spinning in her head, and the needle keeps jumping across the record and landing in a groove that's from 1963 in the Philippines, or a groove from South London in 1982, and that's what's happening when you're having a conversation with Winnie at the moment, and that's where she's at.
And I wanted to know, Ben, has the house been sold?
Susan, yeah, the house was sold pretty quickly.
Yeah.
And it was sold for, let me see, over £10 million. So
wow,
quite a chunk of money. And it was my feeling at the time that a lot more could have been done to get Winnie either back home with some adaptations made to the house, i.e. some ramps and a shower room or a bedroom downstairs, and maybe even 2 or 3 full-time live-in carers, because God knows she had the money. Instead, none of that happened, and she just remained in the care home, receiving, good but standard level of care. And I don't think it helped. And I voiced this opinion on a couple of occasions, but as you'd expect, it wasn't exactly welcome.
Yeah.
You told Stuart this, or?
Yeah. I told him, like, either get her back home ASAP or take some money out of the house, get her a small flat, which is part of a community which has, great pastoral support, maybe a live-in carer, because at the care home, she was living on the dementia floor and she wasn't allowed off it. Okay. And this was when her dementia was very, very minimal and early stages. And I think now when I visit her, it makes me sad, but also angry, because I feel it could have been otherwise. You know, if someone's suffering is inevitable and nothing could have been done about it, you can sort of accept it with a kind of grace and stoicism. But when you feel that it could have been otherwise, it's harder to be sort of at peace with one's suffering.
Yeah.
So and that's got a postscript, if you want me to go into it, the sale of the house, because not long after the house was sold, I got a message from the new owner through social media. And the new owner said to me, I think I'm living in Windy Ridge, because I was bought this book, you know, randomly. I'm reading it. It's about this house. I think I might be living in the house the story's set in. And it turns out she was. And a month later, she invited me to attend her book club.
Oh, wow.
which she hosted at Windy Ridge in the living room, which was completely spare and naked and empty because everything had been removed. So the house at the moment is just a shell. It's going to be a 2-year renovation job.
Wow.
And so we had this book club in the completely empty dining room, and she'd supplied caterers, and it was like a very bizarre occasion, not unpleasant, because it was very nostalgic for me, and they were so appreciative of the book and very conscious of the fact that this was Winnie's house and respectful of that. It was done well. I give the lady her due, but nonetheless, it was quite bizarre. And thereafter, I went to visit Winnie in hospital because she fell again, and she ended up in Chelsea and Westminster Hospital. And next door but one to her in the hospital was the husband of the new owner of her house.
My goodness.
Oh, for heaven's sakes.
Whose appendix had burst. And he recognized Winnie from an article in the Sunday Times magazine. So it was...
Oh my goodness.
It was quite strange. So for about 2 weeks, I was able to visit both the former owner of Windy Ridge and the new one.
Good heavens.
Oh my goodness.
That is
Gosh.
Karma.
Yeah.
That's surreal.
Yeah, it was surreal, but consoling at some level. That maybe, I don't know what was consoling exactly, sort of the way everything's connected and woven, and every ending is actually a beginning in disguise for another person. Yes. There was a consoling element to that coincidence.
Yeah.
And that the home was not raised in order to raise, an apartment complex or something like that. That's wonderful to hear that there is an owner. Yeah. And
the new owner has no ambition to level the house and sell it to a developer, because, and again, credit where it's due, Winnie's children accepted an offer that was, I think, £2 or £3 million less than the highest offer, to make sure it went to a family rather than a developer.
Oh, good for them.
Which, again, further muddies the water when it comes to, people's values and decency and morality. Just when you think that, or you're tempted to say you might have behaved otherwise, or they do something which reminds you that everybody's complicated and everyone's good and bad in their own way. And yeah, I think I suggest this in the book, that I think I refer to a line of Henry James's, that you never claim to have the last word on any human heart, because you don't know what's gone into that heart. You don't know everybody's formative experiences, and I didn't know what it was like to be the child of Winnie for 60 years, and so it's difficult for me to judge that child's behavior in relation to their mother, because I think they felt shortchanged in terms of love all of their adult lives, and that's going to have an effect, and it's going the effect is going to be when your mother needs you to move heaven and earth to make life more comfortable for her, you might be tempted not to.
Yeah.
You might be tempted just to accept the advice of the care home manager when they say, just leave your mother here. She's comfortable, she's happy, this is the best solution. Mm-hmm. And it becomes more complicated when it's a private health facility and they obviously need residents because a resident is actually a customer. But yeah.
So as long as we're speaking of living, where are you now living? I mean, did you find another similar situation, or how did that go for you?
Well, I was joking with Tanya earlier that I've downgraded and now I'm living with my girlfriend.
I did a book about that, are you?
And she's got a lot less life experience, believe me.
You're not saying she's boring, are you?
But she doesn't insist on vegetables being cooked in a soup of butter and salt. So that's one thing she has over Winnie. I lived in the house. So I lived in the house as a sort of caretaker for about 6 months. They didn't want the house empty when it was being sort of emptied and valued and considered by prospective buyers. So they wanted me there, and I was visiting Winnie in the care home and her son as well. So I was there for 6 months, which I appreciated that gesture on their part. They could have just kicked me out. And then I moved in with my girlfriend. I did consider doing another home share arrangement, which is the umbrella term for a younger and older element living together. We call that home sharing here. I did consider doing it again, but the book that I've just finished the first draft for involved a lot more travel. So it wouldn't have been fair really on the new sort of housemate if I was only there occasionally and sporadically. So that's why I've not jumped in to another home sharing situation.
And the girlfriend is the same lady that you talk about in the book?
Megan?
No, I like to mix things up. You know, I've changed my girlfriend once a month. It's still Megan. It's still Megan.
I feel like I'm Megan a bit now. Thank you for sharing that.
Ben, I have 2 quick comments and then a question.
Sure.
I loved, it was just so unusual, but I loved your notations at the bottom of the pages for the sections, because it was just, you know, I noticed that after the first section, I thought, oh, I'm going to read those first. And I just thought that was such a nice touch. And the other comment I have was, I was so taken by this book that I wanted to see if I could find the house, you know, online. But anyway, I searched for you, and I was so delighted that you have a segment on there from Winnie's Kitchen. I loved seeing Winnie's Kitchen, so thank you. It's like I just wanted to see what the house looked like, because you picture it all, and I just kind of felt a part of it. So I loved seeing that. But my question is, when did you realize, after you were living at Windy Ridge, when did you realize that you had a book happening? I mean, the level of detail in here was incredible. So you must be a rabid diarist or something,
because or have a terrific memory.
Oh yeah, what are the other? I mean, it was the level of detail was phenomenal. But when did it occur to you that, hey, I think I could write a book?
It was about 2 or 3 weeks after I moved in. I'd like to say it was as soon as Winnie opened her mouth, but it was actually about 2 or 3 weeks after I moved in. And my publisher wrote to me and said, what's the next travel book? Because all of my books up to that point had been travel based. And I asked them whether they were joking, because we were in the thick of the pandemic. You can hardly write about walking to the convenience store and back. You know, that doesn't amount to a travel book. I said, I am living with this real character, but I don't think there's a book in it. No way. It would be too dull, too monotonous. You know, I'm used to writing about various places and various people. When you write a travel book, things change, the scenery and the personnel. This book would be one person, one place. That looked too reduced and too contained. But they said, well, send us what you've got, because I do keep a diary anyway, and always have done it. It's not always extensive or every day, but I keep a note of what's going on. And when you change substantially your life situation, I tend to write a bit more. And so I had a few notes about Winnie and moving in, and they looked at those and they thought, well, we think there's something in this. Would you speak to Winnie about it? And I asked her what she'd think about, what she thought about me writing a book about the experience of living with her during lockdown. And she said, yes, do whatever, right. Just change my name, for God's sake. She wasn't really, she wasn't concerned. She didn't think what I was up to amounted to much. If you didn't go to work wearing a good suit, you weren't really going to work at all. It was that sort of, as far as she was concerned, I was just sort of mucking about on the computer. But I did check in with her several times just to double check that she was happy for me to go ahead with a diary. But it's largely anonymized, so Winnie isn't Winnie, and the children's names are all changed, and the house isn't called Windy Ridge. But the bulk of that allows me to write more honestly about the important stuff rather than just the labels. If I'd kept everybody's identities intact, I would have had to be a lot more coy about what I was writing. And I think it's better to trade people's names than the beef and the muscle of the story.
Yeah.
Did she get to see any of your early drafts?
No, there was one occasion when she came in to the office and she sort of looked over my shoulder and pointed out a grammatical error, and that was about it. I think she read the passage about her clearing the garage or putting things back in the garage that had been cleared, and and then the only feedback she offered was about the semicolon or something like that.
How about her kids? Did you show them?
Yeah, I showed them an early copy, what Tanya's got there, an advanced reader's copy, so that if they had any serious objections, there was still time to make amendments and corrections. But they didn't have any serious objections. They said it's close to the bone. It wasn't fun for us to read.
Oh,
really?
But,
really?
yeah. They said it was it brought up a lot of hard memories, and
wow.
But they weren't intrusive, and they didn't object to its sort of publication, and they didn't even ask for any amendments. Having said that, the daughter-in-law, who I forget what I called her in the book. I don't know. Jane, yeah. She did say, look, come on, tone me down a bit. I'm not that awful,
And did you?
I on a couple of occasions, yeah, I did. But I just had to remind her that wasn't my take on her. That was Winnie's take on her.
Were you?
But yeah, I forget what the question was.
About just showing it to her children.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, so it was about 2 or 3 weeks after moving in that I sort of had the idea of writing the book, and then yeah, the family, they weren't problematic.
I've got to ask.
And we're still in touch.
Oh, good. I've got to ask, because you're so good at capturing the dialogue, did you keep a notepad with you during breakfast,
Well,
or did you just remember this? You must have a fantastic memory if that's the case.
Yeah.
no, I didn't have a notebook, but I had the equivalent of, Tanya, and that was basically my laptop on my lap pretty much for 80% of that whole year because of the lockdowns. It's the kind of book I will never, ever be able to write again, because I'm not, by my nature, a very disciplined writer. I'm too attracted to the other elements of life to all, just be fixed to my desk and always carrying a notebook. But on this occasion, I had no other choice. You were not allowed to do anything. You were barely allowed to leave the house. And I just got into the habit of sitting in the living room on the reclining armchair in front of the fire with my laptop nearby, because I knew that before long, the phone would ring, Winnie would pick it up, start having a conversation with the dentist or the orthodontist or the chiropractor, and I would be listening from, in the other room, and I had to get that down when it happened, because if you don't get it down when it's happening, it disappears, it just goes, and you can have the best memory in the world, but it's hard to recall, 30, 40, 50 lines of dialogue that happened the day before. It just is. And it's the small details which are often really useful and which add color to dialogue. And so, I did, after a fashion, have a notebook on me the whole time.
Okay. That was another eye opener, was how different the pandemic experience was for you over in England than it was particularly for us here in southern Utah, where
it was spring
we're
break.
in a very conservative part of the state, which is a state that's already conservative, and people here were fighting against wearing masks. And so I mean, as a bookstore, we only closed for 6 weeks, and then we were careful after that. But it was to have yours was a true lockdown. That would never have flown here.
That's right.
Question.
Yeah, go for it, Shauna.
So did Winnie really have an older son that had cerebral palsy or health issues?
Yeah, I'm afraid to say that she does. Yeah. Again, I forget what I call him in the book.
Arthur.
Arthur. Yeah, because I have 5 children, and one of my daughters was just a really difficult child. She still is a 32-year-old. And I would feel guilty that I spent so much time and energy on this one child. And then I worried, that the other 4 maybe felt like they weren't getting the mom that they needed. And I think you really hit on that, the whole motherhood, feeling unappreciated. And when your children realize, wow, okay, she did the best that she could. And maybe, now that my oldest 3 have 3 or 4 children each, they're getting it. Getting it. But you just nailed so many emotions that I felt as a mother in your book.
Yeah.
Appreciate that, Shauna. I think it might have been Carla earlier, spoke about insight, and I wrote down or made a little note, whether it's insight or just careful observation. Like, insight suggests a secret, a special ability to see things that aren't in plain sight. And it felt to me that I wasn't doing that so much. I was just looking more carefully than I normally would do. It was just about watching. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm shortchanging myself and there wasn't an element of inference and you had to be intuitive. But it felt to me a lot of the time that it was just about watching and carefully portraying and transcribing what you saw, and the reader almost provides the insight as much as I did, because I'm just kind of getting out of the way. Here was Winnie, here was how she reacted. I'm not sure, but then again, I am quite reflective in the book as well and reflect on her behavior. So yeah, it's difficult to measure one's own sort of performance when it comes to writing. I can only say, yeah, I just tried my best to get Winnie down on paper, and maybe that did involve a certain amount of insight and reflection that I don't normally operate with, because normally you're not sort of confined to living with one person for an extended period of time. So
one thing that I thought of,
what has happened with Arthur now that Winnie is not mama on the spot?
that's a tricky one to answer as well, Virginia, because in many ways Arthur felt a little bit strangled by his mother's devotion and care, and as far as he was concerned, he could operate and exist without her. And this is an unfortunate consequence sometimes of people that are overloved. They can turn away from the one that was overloved, which sounds like an injustice and looks like an injustice. But this is my way of saying as nicely as possible that Arthur is doing quite well.
Okay.
And yeah, he is doing quite well.
Did you sense the siblings resenting him at all for her attentions on him?
Not explicitly, but maybe implicitly in the fact that they didn't visit Arthur often. So there wasn't sort of measurable resentment, but the fact that their relationship wasn't very close. And you'd think that if your older brother was cerebral palsied and was living in a sort of care home, you would redouble your efforts in having a strong relationship with them. That didn't appear to have happened. Whether, for what reasons, I can only speculate, but I wouldn't be surprised if a part of the jigsaw puzzle is the fact that Arthur was Wendy's first concern, and the second and third children felt that they weren't, and they were left to their own devices, and it didn't do much for their relationship with their brother, I don't think.
I don't recall right now, but did she have siblings herself? Did Winnie have siblings?
She did. She had the brothers.
And I just wonder, why the over attention to Arthur, if she felt any of that from her parents or her mother.
I can only guess. Maybe somebody else in the club could have a better perspective on this. But my only guess is that when you have a child that's born with cerebral palsy and you blame yourself for that, because she really did. She felt that had she been in London rather than the Philippines, she would have been able to have a cesarean, and there wouldn't have been the complicated birth. Therefore, motherhood wasn't just about rearing one child, it was about atoning for what you'd done to that child. But that isn't certain. That's a take on the situation.
Right.
Yeah.
And by your book, I mean, it just seemed like she carried a tremendous level of responsibility for his birth and the complications thereof, because it seemed like it would just come out sometimes at the oddest times. Well, if only I had this, or if only I had that. And mothers tend to do that about every little thing with their kid. If only I hadn't been so strict, or I should have been stricter, but I think from the book, I really sensed that over smothering almost attention on Arthur was a result of her feeling that if she had done something different, not been in the Philippines, that would have never happened.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, I think that's definitely the case. Well, not definitely the case, but I share that interpretation, Carla. I do.
Did any of her kids have the kind of sense of humor that she did?
Not quite. They definitely were chips off the old block in certain ways, but they didn't quite match Winnie's acerbic wit and sort of ongoing commentary on current affairs and what was ever on the radio or whatever turned up in the garden or whatever turned up at the front door trying to sell her something. Or I think that was quite unique to her. I've never met someone with that before. I've never met someone so eloquent in their use of language. I've also never met someone who was so eloquent but blissfully unaware of what a talent that was.
Yeah.
You know, I don't think she would ever have been patted on the back and said, you know what, you're great with words, you should put them down in print. Because, you know, I don't think that happened much when you're growing up in the 50s and the 60s and you're from a certain class. You know, it was the boys that did all those sorts of jobs.
Mm-hmm.
I think a formative experience for her was when she tried to get into Oxford University but didn't because she was told that she wasn't clever enough. And another formative experience was when she was at art school and was asked to do a self-portrait and she loathed it and ripped it up and never drew anything again. So I think she was a very, very self-critical person. But sometimes when you are a self-critical person, you can also be a very loving one as well, because it's a way of making amends or a way of proving your worth. It's unnecessary because the grounds on which you're self-criticizing probably aren't sound at all. But yeah, I forget what the question was. How are we gone to this? But
I think I've read.
One of the things I very much enjoyed about this with Winnie was how she, and I grant you the COVID lockdown helped, but how she had you really tune in to things you might otherwise not have noticed out in the garden. You know, that's pretty remarkable, actually, and how that may have created a change for you going forward.
yeah, I appreciate what you're saying there, Virginia, and a legacy of living with Winnie, as well as the positive memories I have of her and the privilege that was writing about her life and learning about her life. What another dividend, I suppose, is, gosh, I pay a lot more attention to things, small things. I'm a lot more curious about things.
Yeah.
You know, not just horticultural, you know, but that is a good example. You know, I'm on the lookout for flowers and birds now. I never was before. You know, I want to know what tree I'm walking under, you know.
Has that affected your travel writing in your latest book?
It's definitely had an impression, Tanya. Yeah, the book I've just finished, it isn't a travel book, but it contains bits of traveling. It's a book about fun, F-U-N, what the hell it is, what it does to the brain, are we getting enough of it, basically. And one element of the book was a pilgrimage in North Spain called the Camino de Santiago.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I think they made a film about it with Martin Sheen about 10 years ago. He did it. And it's basically an old Catholic pilgrimage. You start in France, cross the Pyrenees, turn right, walk along the north coast of Spain, and end up in this town called Santiago, where the remains of St. James, the apostle of Jesus Christ, are meant to be sort of interred there. So it was essentially, for me, being non-religious, a walking holiday with lots of Spanish food. But we were walking through the Galician countryside, and I was going so slow because I wanted to smell the roses, for want of a better phrase. And I don't think that would have been the case before. So there was a bit of Winnie in me when I was sort of dragging my heels, walking the Camino.
I have a question, Ben, about the italicized narratives about Winnie's life.
Oh, yeah.
Where did those come from? How did you get that information?
It came from the same place. It all came from the horse's mouth. But for one reason or another, there were just certain episodes that, volunteered themselves for a more novelistic treatment. And it was a way of also breaking up the narrative and lending a bit of structure. And so basically, they all started as anecdotes delivered by Winnie at the dining room table over dinner or lunch or breakfast or whatever. And they could have just appeared in the diary as diary entries, as reported speech. I just fancied giving myself a different kind of job, actually, and that was to cast myself as, sort of a third person, objective narrator, reflecting on those moments. Yeah, it was more for my own amusement than anything else initially. Great. But I hope they didn't feel jarring or out of place or whatever. But.
No, I thought they were brilliant in just doing what you say, which was adding another element to the dialogue, another way of observing the family history. So yeah. I thought that was a wonderful literary device.
Yeah, it's really like a window in time.
Yeah.
No, I appreciate that, and I did enjoy that because the narrator, as soon as you are that more omniscient narrator, rather than a first person present tense narrator, when you're that omniscient past tense, you've got a lot more room to sort of play in and a lot of freedom to conjecture and infer, and it almost made me envy novelists, because it felt like an awful lot of fun doing that.
You're going to try your hand at a novel?
I've never attempted to write fiction. I've written 2 plays for the stage, but that was when I was in my late 20s and I was just sort of creative writing as a hobby. But I would be daunted to write a novel or even a novella, because where do you start for a start? There are infinite.
I have to ask about the photo on the jacket, and you're absolutely wild look in your eyes.
I didn't get to see that because I only had the arc.
Want to see it again?
Yeah.
Yeah, you don't know what I'm sat on. That's the thing. No, I was quite mortified when the American publisher, or I think it's the same publisher, but their American sort of branch, they said, "Oh, we would quite like to blow you up and stick you on the back." And I was like, I don't think that's sensible, from a commercial standpoint or any standpoint for that matter. And so that picture was taken in Winnie's living room.
And
I wondered. Yeah.
Because it has the statue.
Well, yeah. The statue, is that based on the... Wait, I thought it was a hanging thing. It wasn't?
Yeah, no, that's a different sculpture. Same sculptor.
Ah.
Nigel Constant. in the hallway next to the living room, there's a suspended, dangling version of these two dancers that seem to be dancing but falling at once. And I think I refer to that one, but this is an echo one, definitely.
I see. Okay. I thought so this was in Winnie's house in the living room that the picture was taken.
Yeah, I wondered.
I thought maybe it was taken in your girlfriend, and she's an artist, and I thought maybe she made a statue based on that.
No, that was at Winnie's house, and the American cover is very different. I don't know if you've seen the UK cover.
Yes.
So
Different.
that's
yeah.
That is her.
Show it again. Oh, wow.
That's her kitchen table.
Oh.
And we were running out of ideas for the cover because at first they were desperate to find a photograph that sort of suggested the relationship, but they weren't easy to come by. You know, it had to be intergenerational. It had to be correct tonally, and we were struggling. And then I just one morning sort of saw the kitchen table looking sort of decorated with the detritus and the bits and pieces of the two of us, and took a quick picture, and then we fiddled it with it a little bit, and that became the cover. But the American branch of Icon Books wanted the Marmalade jar, the pink cover, which I also like. They felt that the American book buyer could handle that more stylized and subtle book cover. Whereas they reckon the UK book buyer needs to know, they need the cup of tea and the marmalade on toast, and they need, I don't know.
Picture back of the UK publication.
Can you say that again, Virginia?
What picture did they use of you on that publication?
None.
None.
Really?
No.
The UK didn't want him on the book.
How dare they?
Yeah, no, absolutely no picture of me anywhere. So
I have to say, when I couldn't help, I had to read parts of this aloud to my husband, and he says this would be a good movie, and I agree.
Yes.
But who, if you were to have a say in who was cast as Winnie, who would you pick?
Who would be Winnie?
Yeah, what actress could do that?
Maybe I'm thinking Whoopi Goldberg for a start. Would be No, I don't know. There's Maggie Smith comes to mind.
Yeah.
Oh yes.
Helen Mirren is good. Imelda Staunton. Yeah.
Okay.
There's a few good ones, but the Grand Tour has recently been what they call optioned for.
Really?
Oh, that could be fun.
Oh, I hope they're optioning this one too.
No, they weren't interested in this one.
What?
They said they don't want to go anywhere near the pandemic. There's a feeling in the industry.
Yeah, but I think that will wear off in a few years.
Yeah, maybe. Hopefully.
Particularly if the Grand Tour gets made and does pretty well, then
that would be great.
Make a better stage play because it's all one sort of.
Interesting.
That's true.
Yeah, that would be an interesting development, and I'd be very happy to try and write a script for the stage, but I guess that would need the support of a serious theatre, because it wouldn't be easy to find the actors to devote the time. You need a bit of luck, don't you? You need the book to fall into a certain pair of hands, and they're just like, right, I want to do this. And I'm just satisfied and chuffed that it was published as a book. If anything comes
send copies to Helen Mirren.
Yeah.
Smith, and who's really hot right now there in the UK on the stage of that age?
Maggie.
Judy.
Yeah,
Judy Dench. Judy Dench. Yeah.
Dench, yeah.
Don't you love them all taking this for you and moving it along into new life, different life space?
We will all have to travel to London as a group to see it.
Oh, yes.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah,
All right,
and
well,
that would be its own kind of grand tour.
Yes, it would.
Perfect.
Okay, well, it is 11:30 here. It has been our hour. You guys have had so many questions. I didn't even get a chance to jump in with any of the other ones that we didn't ask. So
You know what?
we had a great time.
Send those ones to him and he can answer by email and we can share them.
We'll give you some homework is what we'll do there.
Well,
Sounds good.
Thank you so much, Ben,
yes.
for joining us.
Wonderful.
It's a
No,
wonderful book.
thank you to you, Tanya, and I wish your bookshop all the best. And thank you, Valerie, for steering the conversation. And thank you, everyone, for coming. It's been really pleasant. It's been a while since I spoke about the book and reflected on Winnie and all of the other stuff. So it's been really nice.
Well, thank you.
Thank
Come
you.
visit, Ben. Come visit.
Yes.
Oh, yes, that would be
Yeah,
fun.
Utah, that's on the West Coast, right?
Sort
Yeah.
of.
Well,
Close.
it's a couple
California.
hours. It's a couple hours from Las Vegas.
And today is Tanya's bookstore's birthday.
That's right.
Fourth anniversary.
Oh, yes.
So this is
right.
one way to have you with us celebrate.
Yes.
Yeah.
I've got a couple of friends from Utah. I met them on the pilgrim. Remember, I mentioned a pilgrimage in Spain that I recently went on, and I met two people from Utah, and one of them promised to come along to this event, but she hasn't.
Whoops.
So yeah, I've got another reason to come. I could kill two birds with one stone.
Okay.
In on the Camino also, so you are welcome to stay in my home
Yes.
St. George or near Salt Lake City.
Yes.
So it's a Camino throughout the world.
Yes.
Yeah.
Good point. Good point.
Thank you. And
Okay.
well, good luck in all of your writing. And I
Thank
hope
you.
turn it into a play.